I thought I knew every secret my childhood home held. I was wrong. The memories I cherished, the ones I wrapped myself in like a warm blanket on a cold night, were a facade, concealing a soul-chilling secret that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. What I discovered wasn't just unsettling, it was a horrifying truth buried for years, and it will make you rethink every safe place you've ever known. This is a new channel with incredible stories every day. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. My name is Alex. I'm 32, and for the last 10 years, I've made a living as a freelance writer, chasing stories across the country. It's a transient life, one of hotel rooms and borrowed apartments, which is probably why the idea of home became so sacred to me. And for me, home was always that two-story colonial on Maple Street, the one with the slightly crooked porch swing and the big oak tree in the front yard that I'd scraped my knees on 100 times. It wasn't just a building. It was the curator of my entire childhood. I could close my eyes and smell it. The faint, sweet scent of my mom's apple pies that seemed to have soaked into the very drywall, mingling with the dusty, comforting aroma of old books and sun-baked wood. The call from my dad came on a rainy Tuesday. His voice, usually so steady, had a tremor of finality to it. "Son," he'd said, "your mother and I have signed the papers. The house is sold." It wasn't a shock. They'd been planning to downsize for years, moving to a condo closer to the city, but hearing the words made it real. A chapter was closing. "We need you to come help clear out the attic in your old room," he added. "The new owners take possession in 2 weeks." 2 weeks. It felt like a death sentence for a lifetime of memories. I packed a bag that night and drove the 6 hours back to my hometown, a knot of bittersweet nostalgia tightening in my stomach with every mile. Pulling into the driveway felt like traveling through time. The house looked smaller, as childhood homes always do, but it was just as I remembered. The paint was a little more peeled, the garden a bit more overgrown, but it was still the fortress of my youth. My parents greeted me with hugs that felt a little too tight, a little too long. They were trying to be brave, but I could see the sadness in their eyes. We spent the first day packing up the living room, wrapping fragile memories in newspaper and boxing them away. Every photo album, every dusty trinket sparked a story. "Remember this?" my mom would say, holding up a clay handprint I'd made in first grade. "You were so proud of it." We laughed, we reminisced, and for a little while, the sadness was replaced by a warm, glowing nostalgia. The next day, I tackled my old bedroom. It was a time capsule. Faded posters of bands I'd long since forgotten were still taped to the walls. My old desk was covered in a thin layer of dust, the wood scarred with compass point doodles and angsty teenage poetry. I sat on my old bed, the springs groaning in protest, and just breathed it all in. The sun streamed through the window, illuminating a galaxy of dust motes dancing in the air. It was a perfect, peaceful moment. And that's when I saw it. It was nothing, really, a trick of the light. A sunbeam hit the hardwood floor at just the right angle, near the corner where my bookshelf used to stand. For a split second, it illuminated something on one of the floorboards. Not a scratch, but a shape. A small, deliberately carved symbol that looked almost like a stylized bird, or maybe a key. I'd spent 17 years of my life in this room. I'd sprawled on this floor doing homework, building Lego castles, and reading comic books. How had I never seen it before? I knelt, running my fingers over the etching. It was smooth with age. My first thought was that I must have done it myself as a kid and simply forgotten, but it didn't feel like my handiwork. It was too precise, too elegant. Curiosity, that old professional instinct, began to prickle at the back of my neck. I pressed down on the floorboard. Nothing. I tried to slide it. Nothing. Then, using my fingernail, I hooked the edge of the board right beside the symbol. It lifted. Just a fraction of an inch, but it was enough. My heart started to beat a little faster. This was new. This wasn't part of the curated museum of my memory. I went to the garage and came back with a flathead screwdriver, my dad calling after me. "What are you up to in there?" I just mumbled something about a stubborn nail. Gently, I wedged the screwdriver into the gap and pried. The board groaned, a long, mournful sound, and then came loose. Beneath it was not the subfloor I expected, but a small, dark cavity, no bigger than a shoebox. And inside, nestled in a bed of what looked like yellowed, decaying cloth, was a small, tin box. It was the kind you'd see in an antique store, rusted at the edges, with a faded painting of a pastoral scene on the lid. My hands trembled as I lifted it out. It was light, almost empty. I sat back on my heels, the dusty box in my lap, a strange sense of trespassing washing over me. This felt private. I hesitated for a moment. This was my home, my room. But this box felt like it belonged to someone else, to a different time. What would you have done in my place? Just left it alone? Or would you have needed to know the truth, no matter what? Let me know in the comments. For me, there was no real choice. My curiosity was a roaring fire now. I lifted the lid. There was no lock. Inside, resting on a velvet lining that had faded to a dull brown, were two items. The first was a small, ornate skeleton key, made of brass, that had tarnished to a deep, murky green. The second was a single photograph, its edges curled and sepia-toned with age. I picked it up carefully. It was a portrait of a young boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old. He had big, solemn eyes and hair that was a little too long, falling over his forehead. He was wearing clothes that looked old-fashioned, maybe from the 40s or 50s. He wasn't smiling. He was looking at the camera with an expression of profound, heartbreaking sadness. I didn't recognize him. I knew my family's history. My grandparents bought this house in the late 60s. Before that, another family, the Holloways, had lived here since it was built in the 20s. This boy wasn't a relative. He wasn't a Holloway from the town records I remembered seeing once for a school project. Who was he? I turned the photo over. On the back, written in a shaky, childlike script, was a single word. Leo. Leo. The name meant nothing to me. I sat there on the floor of my childhood bedroom, the sunbeam now gone, the room feeling colder, darker. The nostalgic warmth had evaporated, replaced by a creeping unease. This house, my house, had a ghost. Not a literal one, but the ghost of a story I knew nothing about. The key in my hand felt heavy, like a promise. It had to open something. But what? I spent the rest of an hour checking every lock in my room, the old chest at the foot of my bed, a small lockbox in my closet. Nothing. The key didn't fit. I went through the rest of the upstairs, trying it on antique dressers and old doors, feeling more and more foolish with each failed attempt. My mom found me trying to jam the key into the lock of a grandfather clock in the hallway. "What are you doing, sweetie?" she asked, a bemused smile on her face. I couldn't tell her. Not yet. It felt too unreal. "Just messing around," I said, pocketing the key. "You know, one last look at everything." She just nodded, her eyes sad again. "Well, the last thing is the attic. Your dad and I are too old to be hauling boxes down that ladder. That's all you, my boy." The attic, of course. The one place in the house that was a true mystery. We used it for storage, of course. Christmas decorations, old furniture, boxes of my schoolwork. But it was a vast, sprawling space, mostly unfinished, with dark corners and exposed beams that looked like the skeleton of some great beast. As kids, my friends and I had dared each other to go into the farthest, darkest corner, a place we called the Void. It was just a section behind the old water heater, walled off on one side by raw planks of wood that didn't quite match the rest of the construction. We always said it felt cold back there, that it was haunted. We were just kids with overactive imaginations, weren't we? My dad helped me pull down the rickety folding ladder from the ceiling in the upstairs hallway. A puff of old, stale air, smelling of insulation and forgotten things, washed over me. "Flashlight's on the hook," he said, patting my shoulder. "Shout if you need anything." I climbed the ladder, the wooden steps creaking under my weight. The attic was exactly as I remembered it. A chaotic landscape of boxes and shrouded shapes under white sheets. A single, bare bulb cast a weak, yellow light, creating long, dancing shadows. I took a deep breath and stepped off the ladder onto the dusty floorboards. My mission wasn't to pack, not yet. I made my way towards the back, towards the void. The air did feel colder back here. I dismissed it as a draft. The wooden planks were just as I remembered, rough, unfinished, nailed haphazardly to the studs. They looked like a patch, a clumsy afterthought. I ran my hand over them, feeling for anything, a latch, a handle, a keyhole, nothing. My heart sank. Maybe the key was for something that was no longer in the house, something that had been sold or thrown away years ago. Then my fingers brushed against it, a tiny, almost invisible hole, right in the center of one of the planks, obscured by a splinter of wood. It was no bigger than the tip of my pinky. With trembling hands, I pulled the brass key from my pocket. It was a perfect fit. I slid it in, it clicked, I turned it. With a soft metallic thunk, a hidden latch released. My breath caught in my throat. I pushed against the plank. It didn't budge. I pushed harder, my shoulder digging into the wood. It scraped inward with the sound of wood dragging on wood. A wave of air, even colder and mustier than the rest of the attic, washed over me. It smelled of decay and profound stillness. I shone my flashlight into the darkness beyond. It wasn't a void, it was a room. A small, windowless room, no bigger than a walk-in closet. My flashlight beam cut through the thick darkness, revealing a space frozen in time. There was a small cot in the corner, with a thin, stained mattress and a threadbare blanket. A tiny wooden desk and chair were against the opposite wall. On the floor were a few scattered handmade toys, a crudely carved wooden car, a doll made of yarn, but it was the walls that made the blood run cold in my veins. They were covered in drawings, dozens of them, sketched directly onto the wooden planks in what looked like charcoal. At first, they were simple, childish things. A house with a smiling sun, stick figure people, a dog. My house. But as my light moved along the walls, the drawings changed. They became darker, more frantic. The smiling sun was replaced by a scowling, angry face. The stick figures were no longer holding hands. They were in cages. One drawing showed a boy with long hair, just like the one in the photo, looking out from behind a series of vertical bars, a window that wasn't there. The final drawing, right next to the cot, was just a chaotic mess of black scribbles, a vortex of despair. In the center, a single word was scratched into the wood. Alone. I felt like I couldn't breathe. The air was thick, heavy with forgotten sorrow. I stepped fully into the room, the floorboards creaking under my feet. On the small desk was a single object, a leather-bound journal, so old the cover was cracked and peeling. I reached for it, my hand shaking so badly I could barely pick it up. I opened it to the first page. The same shaky, childish script from the back of the photograph filled the page. My name is Leo. Mother says I must stay here where it is safe. She says the sun is not my friend. She says the world is not my friend. My only friend is the wall. I sank onto the small, dusty chair, my flashlight beam trembling on the page. I read on, flipping through the brittle yellowed pages. It was a diary, Leo's diary. And it told a story that shattered every single happy memory I had of this house. Leo wasn't a ghost, he was a real boy. He had lived in this house in the 1950s. He was the son of the Holloways, the family who lived here before my grandparents. But Leo was sick. The diary was vague on the details, written with a child's understanding. He wrote about bad days when his skin hurt and his breath was loud. He wrote about doctors who came and shook their heads. He had a severe form of what sounded like an immunodeficiency, or a severe allergy to sunlight, something that, in that era, was poorly understood and carried a heavy social stigma. The Holloways, a prominent family in town, were ashamed. They were terrified. So they did the unthinkable. They hid him. They created this room in the attic and told the world they had only one child, a healthy daughter. Leo became the family's horrifying secret. His mother would bring him food when his father and sister were out. He wrote about hearing his sister's friends playing in the yard below, their laughter like a language he couldn't understand. He wrote about the loneliness, an all-consuming, crushing loneliness that bled through every word. "Today is my birthday," one entry read. "I am 9. Mother brought me a cupcake with one candle. She sang to me in a whisper. I wish that I could blow out my candle and become a real boy." My own childhood memories started to warp, to curdle. The sound of my friends laughing in the yard wasn't just my memory anymore. It was an echo of the sounds that had tortured this poor hidden child. The sunny afternoons I spent in my room were a luxury he was never afforded. My house, my sanctuary, had been his prison. The happy energy I always felt within these walls was built on a foundation of his silent suffering. The last few pages of the diary were frantic, the handwriting barely legible. He wrote about his cough getting worse, about a fire in his chest. "Mother cries when she sees me now," he wrote. "She doesn't whisper songs anymore." The very last entry was just a few words, scrawled weakly across the page. "The wall is cold. I am so tired." And then the pages were blank. I closed the diary, a wave of nausea and profound grief washing over me. I wasn't just a writer discovering a story. I was an archaeologist who had just unearthed a tomb. Leo didn't just live here. He died here, alone in this cold, dark room. The weight of it was crushing. How could a family do this? How could this house, my house, hold such a monstrous secret? I don't know how long I sat there in the dark, in Leo's room. It felt like hours. The single bare bulb from the main attic cast a faint glow through the opening, making the charcoal drawings on the wall seem to shift and writhe. I thought about the ghost stories my friends and I used to tell about this place, the unexplained cold spots, the faint sounds we thought we heard from the floor above. We'd laughed about it, thrilled by the idea of a harmless haunting. The reality was so much worse. It wasn't a ghost, it was an echo of a pain so immense it had soaked into the very timbers of the house. Finally, numb and shivering, I stood up. I took the diary. I couldn't leave it here. It felt like a sacred text, the only evidence that Leo had ever existed. I backed out of the room, pulling the heavy plank back into place. It scraped shut with a sound of finality, sealing the secret once more. But it wasn't sealed. It was out now. It was with me. I stumbled down the attic ladder, my mind reeling. My mom was in the hallway. One look at my face and her smile vanished. "Alex, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." The irony was a bitter pill. "Worse," I whispered, my voice hoarse. I led my parents to the kitchen table, the same table where I'd done my homework and eaten thousands of family dinners. I put the tarnished tin box, the photograph, and the old diary down in the center. I told them everything. I watched their faces shift from confusion to disbelief, and then to a slow, dawning horror. My father, a man of logic and reason, just kept shaking his head. "That's impossible, Alex. We've lived here for over 40 years. We would have known." But my mother was silent, her face pale. She stared at the photo of Leo, her hand covering her mouth. A tear rolled down her cheek. "The cold spot," she whispered. "In the hallway, right under the attic stairs. It's always been there. Your grandmother used to talk about it." My grandparents, they had bought the house from the Holloways. Had they known? "Grandma Sarah," my mom said, her voice distant. She told me once, when I was very young, that the Holloway family had a great sadness in this house. She said Mrs. Holloway never seemed happy, but she never said why, and she told me to never, ever play in the back of the attic. She said it was unsafe. Unsafe, not because of rotting wood or exposed nails. Unsafe because of the truth it was hiding. My grandparents might not have known the whole story, but they knew something. They had sensed the tragedy, respected its borders, and passed down the warning without explanation. And we, in our modern ignorance, had turned it into a silly ghost story. We sat in silence for a long time, the weight of Leo's short, tragic life filling the room. Every joyful memory I had of this place now had a dark shadow attached to it. Every Christmas morning we'd spent downstairs, every birthday party, every simple family dinner. He had been up there, alone, listening. The realization was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I felt an immense, irrational guilt, as if my happiness had been stolen from him. Do you think I did the right thing by telling my parents? Or should I have kept this terrible secret to myself and let them keep their untainted memories of the house? It's a question I still ask myself. The next few days were a blur. The packing seemed meaningless. We moved like robots, boxing up a life that suddenly felt like a fiction. We couldn't look at the walls, the floors, the very air in the same way. The house wasn't a home anymore. It was a memorial. On our last day, as the moving truck pulled away, I stood on the porch and looked back at my bedroom window. I imagined a small, sad face peering out, a face that had never been allowed to feel the sun. If this story is resonating with you, please consider subscribing. It helps me share more of these experiences. We sold the house. We handed the keys over to a young, happy family with 2 small children. We didn't tell them. How could we? Welcome to your new home. By the way, it was once a prison for a dying child who was hidden from the world by his own family. It would have been cruel, so we smiled, and we lied, and we wished them well. I watch them sometimes, on social media. They post pictures of their kids playing in the yard, laughing in the living room. They're creating their own happy memories, blissfully unaware of the sorrow that underpins their joy. Sometimes I think that's for the best. I kept the diary, I kept the photo, and the key. They sit on my desk in my small, anonymous apartment, 1,000 miles away. They are a constant reminder that every place, every person, has a story that lies beneath the surface. My childhood home isn't a place of comfort for me anymore. It's a question. It's a responsibility. I've started researching the Holloway family. It's difficult. Records from that time are sparse. I found the daughter's obituary. She died a few years ago, childless. I found a record of Mr. and Mrs. Holloway buried in the town cemetery. There is no mention of a son. It's as if they succeeded. They erased him from history. But they didn't. His story survived, tucked away under a floorboard, waiting. And now it's my story to tell. Not for a headline, not for a book, but for him. For the little boy who was denied the sun, whose only friend was a wall. Uncovering the secret of my house didn't give me closure. It gave me a purpose. The threshold I crossed wasn't just into a hidden room. It was into a deeper understanding of the world, of the silent tragedies that surround us, hidden in the places we call home. My house on Maple Street is no longer mine, but Leo's story is. And I have to make sure it's finally heard. What do you think happened to the Holloways? What becomes of people who carry a secret that heavy? Share your thoughts or theories in the comments. I read all of them.